Socrates refused to neatly define the self he had in mind, just as Buddha refused to use a word like God. Their reasons were the same. It defeats truth to use words, since words imply that you know what you are looking for. Instead, truth is an experience. It cannot be anticipated any more than one can anticipate at age 5 what it will feel like to go to college, get married, and have children. Experience is fresh and new, or should be. Thus, truth is fresh and new. From there, it's a small step to demanding that God be fresh and new. More than anything else, such an open-ended approach to the truth showed Socrates the way to his trial and execution. The authorities were right to be afraid of him. As a teacher, Socrates taught his pupils to question everything. But that by itself wasn't treasonous. Intellectual freedom, as he would dub it, was a small part of the Socratic method. To grasp how truly dangerous Socrates was, you have to go back to Diotima and a revolution in the unfolding of God. In translation, we find Socrates speaking of God and the gods fairly equally. Every society co-opts God to bolster the status quo. Good people go to church or make sacrifices at the temple of Athena. Obey the rules. Fear Fear divine punishment. Worry about the afterlife. Feel patriotic and go to war to defend their country. God supports these activities, and so did the Greek gods. Diotima, who gets credit from Socrates for being his teacher and much wiser than he, stands for a different perspective, one that is far more radical. She saw the entire world as a mystery, and delving into the mystery meant overturning the very notion of truth. What is true? In Athens during the 5th century BC, the truth was a set of ideas that could be taught, and the better you mastered these ideas, the wiser you were. A school of teachers known as sophists, taking their name from Sophia, the Greek word for wisdom, collected the best ideas and passed them on. It was insulting to them when Socrates exposed their methods as empty and misguided. As a class, the sophists are portrayed as self-deluded, if not vain, fools. Plato is our source for everything we know about Socrates, essentially, and his low opinion of them, the sophists, serves as a foil for the total integrity of Socrates, who feared nothing, either as a soldier when he fought for Athens, or in the face of death when he refused all offers to help him run away after the court's guilty verdict. Socrates was a kind of arch-seducer. He aimed to make truth so seductive that it overtook the mind, purified it of all false beliefs, and ignited a lifelong hunger for a higher reality. Bring me a higher love. For Socrates, truth and reality were the same. The light. They were like a brilliant light compared to ordinary reality, which was like watching shadows playing on the walls of a cave. If you face one way, you are captivated by the shadow play. If you turn around, you are dazzled by the light. This position is known as idealism, and we are the children of it, just as we are the children of the practical, hard-headed realism that Socrates was accused of subverting. Ideals, also known as Platonic forms, are the essence of everyday experience. The ideal of beauty is perfect and transcendent because it exists We see flowers, children, and our lovers as beautiful. The ideal filters down into the ordinary world, where we see it in diluted form. The same holds for the ideals of truth, justice, and all other higher aspirations. We are seeking the ideal, starting with everyday experience, but rising higher and higher. If we are true philosophers, lovers of wisdom, wise dome, wit, wisdom, until the pure ideal is revealed. This is the soul journey Socrates outlined. It's easy to condemn those who put him to death. And yet, being honest with ourselves, we probably want the same thing they defended. A stable society without inflammatory radicals, free radicals, who incite discontent. To many good Athenian citizens, Socrates was a disruptive force. To those who turn over the apple cart, Apollo, must die. Those who turn over the apple cart must die before they become martyrs and heroes. In their lifetime, they are seen as serious troublemakers. In reality, Socrates worshipped the same gods as every other devout person, and he disapproved of youth-run riot. Dissipation wasn't part of his teaching any more than blasphemy was. Yet in a deeper way, Diotima taught blasphemy to her pupil, because know thyself is extremely subversive in the end. To take it seriously means that you will go on a search for God that enters the inner world and places a lower value on the outer world. It means that you will be in the world but not of it. That you will become the light of the world rather than hiding your light under a bushel basket. I can use phrases associated with Jesus because the link to Platonism is quite strong. The link to Jesus and Platonism is quite strong. In fact, some scholars believe that the Gospel of John in the New Testament was written by someone well versed in Plato's thought and the Greek ideals. Jesus is a Greek name. Yeshua is the Hebrew. Joshua, Josh, jest, Jesus, storytelling. The Christian tradition is most people's direct link to Socrates. John's Gospel contains no miracles and no Christmas story. It begins with the most abstract approach to God in the Bible. Quote, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Unquote. The word logos in Greek took on a deep meaning for early Christians. It described who Jesus was and where he came from. John is quite explicit about this. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. This is quote again. We have seen his glory and the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John chapter 1, verse 14. But why should Jesus need Socrates and vice versa? One reason is that when Jesus was crucified, his disciples were left behind, expecting, quite literally, that the Messiah's purpose had been to overthrow the Roman Empire, free the Jews from bondage, the Jews, and reign supreme over the earth. Only then would the Old Testament prophets like Isaiah be justified and fulfilled. When that didn't happen, the disciples felt betrayed and defeated. John is seen as the rescuer of Jesus' mission. He says in simplest form, quote, "The Messiah did what he was supposed to do. The Jesus who walked among us was divine as a word, an ideal, a spirit. Mortal eyes are fooled into seeing him as mortal too. Seen with the eyes of the soul, Jesus was an incarnation of spirit, as are all of us when we come to God." What else is John's message but know thyself, restated in Christian terms? And yet no teaching is harder to follow. One despairs that Socrates and Jesus were both persecuted for telling the truth, yet it's not unexpected. If you want to see how challenging know thyself really is, try to live it for a week. Once a person spends any amount of time looking inward, what is revealed is conflict, confusion, and a completely disorganized world in here. Fear and anger roam at will through the psyche. The shadow, which we touched upon in the story of Job, rules over a hidden realm of guilt and shame. Atavistic impulses like jealousy, lust, and revenge war with reason. 6 o'clock wars with 12 o'clock. Even if the inner world doesn't reveal turmoil, the alternative may be a humdrum conventionality that becomes more depressing the closer you examine it. Know thyself makes for a rough week and a challenging lifetime. Challenging. C-H-A-L-L. All. L. The status quo depends on conformity. With formity. Not just the drone-like conformity of bees in a hive, but a shared agreement not to look too deeply into human nature. Don't let me get too deep. How many times do people say to me out in the Ra-Tes public, "Oh, you're going too deep for me"? It's because of this shared agreement not to look too deeply into human nature. Within. Unable to rid ourselves of mindless drives like lust, greed, and aggression, 6 o'clock, human beings bought civilization at a price. We gave up complete authenticity in order to stay safe and sane. Socrates taught the opposite, as did Jesus. He taught that if you go deep enough, there is supreme light beyond the confusion and chaos, the id and the ego, sex and the lust for power. Only the light is real. Only the light is real. Only the light at the top at 12 o'clock. In various guises, we will encounter this claim over and over as human beings begin to ponder who God actually is. Diotima apparently passed the idea on to Socrates, and he took it to the streets. The sophists were deluded to assume that the truth could be doled out in neatly wrapped packages, but Socrates may have been deluded to assume that the way to the truth can be taught at all. The raucous, brilliant, rebellious, treacherous Alcibiades raises grave doubts on that score. He led disastrous military adventures abroad, the worst being an infamous war to conquer Greece. Then he abruptly turned on his heels and betrayed Athens by selling his services to the Persians, who made what use of him they could before killing him. About a minute and 20 seconds left. Will we get to finish this? Yes, okay. Socrates taught a high-born, gifted pupil who wound up making no use of his teaching whatever. When Alcibiades drunkenly breaks into a banquet, he insists on lying on the couch closest to his old teacher, and when the company takes to praising Socrates, this is in Plato's Symposium, Alcibiades' voice is the loudest, but he was not a good man. In our day, preachers would frown and call him godless. Yet every morality tale needs a prodigal son, which is what Alcibiades turned into. The difference is that he wasn't redeemed. That concept, which requires grace to descend from God to touch a person's soul, has yet to arrive on the scene. Reflecting on Socrates, a skeptic may ask how much good wisdom has done anyone. Isn't God about faith in the end? Not necessarily. In India, there is a saying about the spiritual path: one spark is enough to burn down the whole forest. Which is to say, once you've glimpsed the light, eventually the darkness will be conquered. Socrates brought the light of the mind. He wasn't so much a gadfly as a spark.